paved with gold. To succeed here, like Afanasyev, you need a grasp of networking, Moscow style.
During the Soviet times, people distrusted the government. So the only network of support they had was their friends. And it was the kind of friends that sometimes were willing to go to jail for a friend if they had to. Friendship to the extreme.
Yes.
That's the Russian way of friendship. And then what happened is everything tumbled and turned upside down. Communism became capitalism. So in that big of a mess, how do you distinguish who you can rely on and who not? And the only thing that carried through all these changes is that old network of personal friends.
Afanasyev's network of friends quickly became a network of influence, extending beyond the oligarchs to the very heart of power.
The best way to build a success in Russia is to help Russia. For instance, our law firm has represented Russia as a country in some of the most important cases internationally. We feel this is the way we give back to Russia for the success that Russia gave us.
So if there's one person I ought to know here in Moscow, who should it be?
The president. And a good driver.
And how do I get to see the president? What's the key to unlocking his door?
Think what you can do for Russia, not what Russia can do for you. And you'll get to see the president.
And to get a good driver, what do I need to do?
That's a more difficult question.
Today, Moscow's most powerful man is not an oligarch, but the country's president, Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin. I knew that with the best will in the world, there wasn't much I could do for Russia. So the likelihood of a meeting was pretty remote. But how close could I get? On the surface, Moscow has come a long way since I was last here. There are nice hotels, comfy beds, and no bugs. But power, on the other hand, seems much as I remembered it. For hundreds of years, the focus of power has been the Kremlin, occupied today by President Putin. He hails from the organization that, during the Cold War, was our biggest enemy, the KGB. When Putin first became president in the year 2000, power was in the hands of the oligarchs. He soon changed all that, returning it to the Russian state. But there was also another group that benefited. Ordinary Muscovites refer to them as siloviki, literally people of force, former agents of the KGB, the security services, and the military. Some of them are friends of President Putin, who, like so many Russians, seems to value personal loyalty above all else. Touch the cloak and daggers. Here, I'm sitting in the back of a car under a railway bridge, waiting for a former KGB and Special Forces officer. I hope that he's going to tell me everything about the role of the security services in Putin's Moscow. For much of the 1980s, Anatoly Yermolin was a KGB officer, part of an elite unit which operated in countries like Afghanistan.
Я 10 лет прослужил в спецподразделении «Вымпел». Пришел я обычным разведчиком и увольнялся командиром разведгруппы, командиром групп специального назначения.
In the privacy of my car, Anatoly briefed me on his 2011 investigation into the number of Siloviki who held positions of power.
Мы взяли таблицу и начали заполнять ее людьми, ключевыми фигурами, и начали красить это разными цветами. И в результате вся наша таблица там, наполовину была закрашена васильковым цветом. Это цвет погон сотрудников государственной безопасности. То есть по этой таблице очень четко видно, что выстроена действительно очень такая грамотная модель управления страной, да, где верхушка этого корпоративного управления — это министры, да, которые в прошлом занимали должности. Там есть много генералов, полковников, системы государственной безопасности, да.
But you could argue, Anatoly, that any new leader, when he comes to power, needs to have the comfort and security of people around him with whom he is familiar.
Может быть, это было бы нормально на стартовом этапе. Но что мы видим сейчас? Мы сейчас видим, что в России выстроена, по сути дела, но я это называю агентурно-оперативная модель управления страной. То есть они создали такую систему управления страной, да, где, казалось бы, все подконтрольны.
If I were a big businessman, or if I wanted to start a business, then it would be impossible for me to do this without having a good relationship
Невозможно,
with these
конечно.
forces. I would have to have some kind of understanding.
Абсолютно невозможно.
One of those who is believed to have fallen foul of Putin's network is the businessman Mikhail Khodorkovsky, who Yermolin worked for after leaving the KGB. Once Russia's richest man, Khodorkovsky was convicted of fraud in 2005 and remains in prison after a trial many claim was politically motivated.
Одним из, я думаю, элементов политики, которая была применена к Ходорковскому и к ЮКОСу, это был фактор устрашения. Нам четко сказали, если вы не понимаете, что сейчас происходит, смотрите пример Ходорковского. То есть Ходорковский стал реальной фигурой и для устрашения всех остальных крупных предпринимателей.
For the hard men in the Kremlin, showing their strength has been an important instrument of power. And while many may have smirked at pictures of Putin throwing himself around on a judo mat, it's part of a calculated ploy to boost his image as a strong leader.
Behind these walls sits the most powerful man in Moscow, President Putin. This is as close as I'm likely to get to a leader whose authority has always rested on a traditional Russian respect for strength. That authority has come under challenge for the very first time.
My visit to Moscow coincided with the aftermath of Russia's presidential elections, which Putin had won amidst allegations of vote rigging. At first glance, this protest rally looked to be an example of the new and more democratic Russia, and to a degree it was. But as we drove through the streets, I felt I was back in the good old USSR.
Last time I saw so many police on the streets of Moscow was when Brezhnev died in the 1980s. Of course, in those days, an anti-government protest would have been unthinkable.
Political opposition in Moscow was once the preserve of dissidents and the intelligentsia. But today, many protesters belong to a burgeoning middle class who have prospered thanks to Russia's growing economy. They have tablets and smartphones and are part of an online community which is already the biggest in Europe. I had an appointment with a woman who is the embodiment of this new social phenomenon. Ksenia Sokolova is the deputy editor of a magazine which is rather curiously called Snob.
Спасибо большое. Я Кристофер.
Я Ксения. Проходите.
Outside Ksenia's flat, security service officers were on standby in response to the protests around the corner.
Видите, отсюда как видно, все ОМОНовские машины. Смотрите. Портят вид.
Many of Ksenia's readers are part of the wealthy urban class who've taken to the streets.
Наших читателей интересовали яхты, какие-то Бентли, какой-то образ жизни, джет-сет вообще. И вдруг, когда всего этого все наелись, людям понадобилось нечто большее, а именно свобода слова, желание понимать, что делают власти, и нежелание, чтобы власти считали их идиотами.
Although Ksenia is a critic of the government, I hoped she might suggest someone close to the Kremlin who would speak to me.
If I wanted to talk to people in this magic circle around Putin, could I go and talk to Putin? Could I go and talk to...
Нет, они не разговаривают, они это очень не любят. Хотя Путин общается иногда с иностранными журналистами, вот, но они закрыты.
They're as closed as the Politburo was.
Страна поменялась. Интернет в мире существует. Там, я не знаю, Космические корабли в космос летают, а у нас все тоже политбюро.
It was as I'd expected. A Kremlin insider seemed frustratingly out of reach. But then Ksenia pointed a way through.
Удивительная особенность светской Москвы, она как раз в том, что все эти люди из Кремля, те, кто протестует на улице против Кремля, те, кто пишут, как я, там всякие статьи очень резкие и про Путина, и про всех, мы все встречаемся, и все общаемся и дружим.
I need a mentor, a navigator to lead me through the...
Okay, I can be your navigator.
Can you be my navigator? That's excellent.
Of course.
By the time I left Ksenia's flat, she had not only given me an introduction to a government official, she'd also arranged a meeting with a young woman, beautiful of course, who was once a family friend of Vladimir Putin. Thanks to my new friend Ksenia Sokolova, I've been invited to attend a political talk show called Gostep. With guests from across the political spectrum, the program was originally aired on Russian MTV, but was axed after just one episode. The presenter Ksenia Sobchak was recently voted one of the most influential women in Russia. Her father, when mayor of St. Petersburg, helped launch Vladimir Putin's political career, and until recently, she was a family friend.
The program's over. She's doing a few pieces to camera. She's told us we have only 10 minutes, so we better get in there and grab her before she goes away.
My interview took place while the director was teaching the audience how to clap.
Tell me, has this fantastic discussion, which you did brilliantly, you controlled it brilliantly, has it taken place in a democracy or in an autocracy or something in between?
Well, now, unfortunately, it has taken place in internet, and due to this, I think, of course, we are speaking about lack of free press in Russia, because these kind of discussions, unfortunately, you can't see on Russian TV, and for me as a journalist, it's a huge problem. This problem used to be on MTV, but since the first issue of this program has come out on air, the program was banned. I can't work on federal TV, and the kind of programs, political programs they do there is like, you don't want to watch them.
Because the powers are controlling those other sources.
Because they don't want people to know different kind of views, you know? Like for me, for example, I invite from both sides people.
You had all kinds of people
Yeah,
there
like,
tonight.
and they don't agree among themselves. I had people which are totally pro-Kremlin, and I'm also giving them the right to speak and to discuss. But when you like withdraw one of the positions, then you realize you live in a kind of absurd world, and this is where I don't want to live. I want my country to know what's happening.
Ksenia is none too pleased that Vladimir Putin will be Russia's president for yet another term.
And I've counted that in 6 years I will be only 36, and then, of course, I can do something, because more than 6 years it cannot last. I don't believe
Before the 6-year period is finished, it will change fundamentally.
Well, it can't be 12 years, come
It can't
on.
be 12.
Otherwise, I will learn English better and go to the States, because, you know, 40-something, no, I'm not ready.
So you would say that power is shifting, moving towards you and people like you, and away from the traditional...
I don't think that the power is moving towards me.
You're one of the most influential women in Russia.
I don't know, maybe this is your opinion.
My suggestion that Ksenia has power seemed to make her nervous, a sign perhaps of Moscow's current tensions.
I'm a bit shy because I'm afraid that some kind of provocation will happen right now. You will hand up some dollars out of your pocket.
Me?
And then NTV comes out and the federal channels show, look, she's also been paid by American citizens. This is what they usually do.
Yeah.
Actually, even speaking English in Russia now is a bit kind of, you know, scary thing.
So
It's
talking to an
scary.
Englishman is a dangerous thing to do these days.
Kind of, you know, because the propaganda says that all the people who don't agree with the powers, they are paid by Americans.
Yes.
So please give me my $100. I mean, why do I work for free?
Most of Russia's newspapers, television and radio rarely dare express any criticism of the Kremlin. But there are a few exceptions. Echo of Moscow is the city's most popular radio station, with around 1 million listeners a day. I arrived as editor-in-chief Alexei Venediktov was discussing the week's events on air. While I waited, I decided to admire the photos of the great and the good who have appeared on Echo.
Richard Gere, bringing enlightenment to the Russian masses.
Господин Венедиктов, я Кристофер Мейер. Очень приятно.
Venediktov himself has quizzed many of the world's great leaders, from the Clintons to Putin.
Хотя здесь Путин.
Young, молодой. Young.
Здесь Путин, который только что назначен директором службы безопасности, еще до президентских выборов.
Before he was president.
Over the years, and many meetings, Venediktov has got to know the way Putin works.
What kind of a man is he?
Президент Путин стал президентом, когда он не был готов к этой власти. Мы сегодня имеем другого Путина, совсем другого Путина. У него, конечно, осталось вот это базовое видение мира, брежневского мира. Однажды Путин мне сказал, что всех своих противников, конкурентов он делит на две части. На врагов и предателей. Враги – это люди, с которыми ведешь войну, потом заключаешь мир. А есть предатели, les traîtres.
The traitors.
Да, это люди, которые были с тобой вместе, которые всегда или раньше были на твоей стороне, но когда ты ослаб, они тебе ударили в спину. Вот если с врагами, говорит Путин, я всегда смогу найти общий язык,
Yes.
то предателям никакой пощады. И я его спросил, в этой конструкции я-то кто? И он сказал, в этой конструкции, Алексей, вы, конечно, враг. И я был очень доволен.
Why have you survived?
Это вопрос к Путину.
But you must have an idea.
Первое. Мы, безусловно, являемся витриной для Запада, для вас, что вот в России есть свобода слова, а кто не верит, послушайте «Эхо Москвы». Второе. Мы, безусловно, являемся, и мы это знаем, источником информации для них.
Для них.
Для них.
For them.
И третья позиция, безусловно, это мои личные связи и с господином президентом, и с господином премьером, и с людьми, которые их окружают. И в случае конфликтов мне приходится очень много пить разных напитков, от водки до пива, и от хороших вин до плохих вин, от хорошего портвейна до плохого портвейна, с тем, чтобы урегулировать ситуацию.
After years relying on his chums and the siloviki from his KGB past, Venediktov thinks Putin's network of power is changing.
Видим сейчас некоторые назначения молодых людей, молодых волков, людей, работавших в Европе, людей, учившихся в Европе, которые начинают постепенно составлять его новую свиту. А свита, как известно, играет короля.
The irony is that of all the people I've met in Moscow this week, the one who seems to know personally Putin the best is the editor of this radio station who, uniquely among Moscow broadcasters, is allowed repeatedly to get under Putin's skin.
Gorky Park lies a few miles south of President Putin's office in the Kremlin. It's named after the literary mouthpiece of the Russian Revolution, Maxim Gorky. Thanks to Ksenia Sokolova, I was going to meet one of this new breed of appointees I'd heard about.
Back in the old days, I used to bring the children here to play on the swings. I've got to say, on a day like today, it was the most depressing experience on God's earth. Now, Sergei Kapkov has apparently jazzed the whole place up. First signs? Not terribly promising. But let's keep an open mind. We'll see.
To make Gorky Park less depressing, Sergei Kapkov has introduced brightly colored buildings, even ice sculptures, all aimed at making the place more welcoming. A tough job when the weather's this bad.
Здравствуйте.
Having people like Kapkov on board is good for President Putin, as he has no history with the KGB.
Мне было интересно что-то сделать для людей. Мне было интересно поучаствовать в процессе изменений. Мне было интересно показать тренд. Москва – это город без центра. Это такая большая, размытая такая матрица.